So now we want to talk about all the different things that will shift the demand curve. Remember, we said that when we have a change in demand, that it was due to something other than price, and there are a number of different factors that will actually shift that demand curve. The first factor would be changes in income. Of course, when we started talking about demand, we said something about ceteris paribus. If the price of a good went up, the quantity demanded would go down. That ceteris paribus meant that we were going in and holding our income constant. Well, we know income isn't always constant. It does change. So what we find is as income increases, that leads to an increase in demand. And thus, again, to refresh our memories, if we have our quantity here and our price, if we start out with a demand curve, initially call it D naught, when income goes up, demand will increase. People will buy more of the good regardless of what the price is, and thus that demand curve will shift itself out and to the right. On the other hand, when income decreases, people do not have as much money to buy the good, and so therefore the demand for that good is going to decrease. And thus this demand curve will shift back and to the left. So that's our first factor. The second factor that will shift the demand curve would be what we call the number of buyers or population in a market or in a society. So the idea is if you have an increase in the population, and of course this can come from two ways, either by natural procreation or by immigration, it doesn't matter. As population goes up, that means more people will be buying the good, and therefore that will be an increase in demand. And thus that demand curve will shift out and to the right. If you have a decrease in population, whether it be by mass exodus, famine, death, whatever the case might be, if the population of your society goes down, then there are fewer people to buy the good, so demand will decrease, and that demand curve will shift back and to the left. The third item that will shift the demand curve, I'm going to put under the heading the prices of related goods. Now there are two of these that we can talk about. The first one under this is going to be the price of substitutes. Now substitutes are goods that can replace each other. Goods that can replace each other. So 87 octane gas and 92 octane gas, Nike and Reebok, Dell and Hewlett Packard, Ford and Chevy, right? All of those would be considered substitute goods. Now, the idea is we are going to go in and we are going to look at two goods. This is a little bit more complicated, but this is the first step in a process that we're going to look at just a little bit later on to show how the change in the price of one good can go in and change the demand for the other good. Right? If we're talking about substitutes, let's say Coke and Pepsi. Right? Coke and Pepsi are good substitute goods. So we have a downward sloping demand curve for Coke, mark it as D, and we have a downward sloping demand curve for Pepsi, mark it as D naught. Now you notice the D naught. I want to see if we have a change in the price of Coke, how is that going to affect the demand for Pepsi? So let's say we start out with an initial price of Coke being 50 cents per can. And right now, the corresponding quantity demanded of Coke is going to be Q naught, however many millions of cans that might be. Now, what if the price of Coke goes up to 60 cents per can? Ceteris paribus, since the price of Coke went up, and that's the only thing that changed in the market, the quantity demanded of Coke is going to go down. All right. What you have to remember is Coke is now more expensive than Pepsi. And if Coke is more expensive, people are going to substitute over into the cheaper commodity. Therefore, the demand for Pepsi is going to push out and to the right. So you can say if the price of a substitute increases, the demand for its substitute will increase. So again, if the price of the price of Coke goes up, then the demand for Pepsi will push out and to the right. And the exact opposite of this will work as well. So if the price of a substitute decreases, so in this case, the price of Coke decreases from 60 down to 50 cents a can. Now, Coke is relatively cheaper than Pepsi. People will substitute back into Coke, and therefore the demand for its substitute will decrease, which means the demand curve for Pepsi will push back and to the left.